Imagine you witness a crime and you got a glance at the culprit's face. A few days later, the police knock at your door to ask you some questions and they show you mugshots of the current suspects. Another few days go by and the police calls you to tell you to identify the culprit in a lineup. You recognize some faces. You see the cashier of the grocery store and the librarian of the town library, but one face in particular is familiar and you can't quite tell why. You assume that this is the suspect and you tell the police. As it turns out, no subject in the lineup was the actual culprit, and that familiar feeling occurred because you had already seen the face in the suspects list the police had first shown you. This was the scenario recreated by a study that found that almost 30% of the participants falsely accused the suspect because they remembered him from somewhere and assumed they saw him on a crime scene. But why does this happen? How can memories be familiar but can't quite be placed? And why do these memories trick us into remembering false events? The cause of this is our implicit memory. In the simplest term, implicit memory is a type of memory that we are not even aware of. It is both unconscious and unintentional. It is helpful in remembering how we do everyday activities with no effort. But to understand what exactly implicit memory is, let's take a look at two experiments that led researchers to its existence. In a study, participants were asked to read a list of words. Sometime later, a separate list of words was given to them, and they were asked to identify the words that they had already seen in the first list. In another study, participants were also shown a list, but after some time, they were asked to indicate which letter strings in a new list were words or not. Some of the letter strings were duplicates of the words seen in the first list. Despite the similarity between the two studies, when the time delay between the two lists was long enough, they yielded very different results. The participants of the first, who had to recall whether the words were already shown to them, completely forgot all the words in the first list. However, the participants in the second study, who were asked to identify whether some letter strings were words, still had memory of the words. These results suggest that the participants were influenced by an experience that they were not aware of, and that memories can be explicit or implicit. This is also supported by the fact that when people are given a few initial letters and are asked to form new words, they are more likely to create words that they have recently seen or heard, without memory of the recent encounter. In a memory experiment, participants were given a list of fictitious names to read out loud. Later, another list consisting of famous, less famous, and fictitious names were shown to the participants, and they were asked to rate the names according to how famous they think they were. Some participants were shown the second list right after the first, and some were given 24 hours in between. When the second list was shown immediately after, people understood why some of the names felt familiar. Participants who waited, however, had no memory of seeing the name in the first list, and therefore had only a broad sense of familiarity. They were more likely to rate the fictitious names as famous, as they wrongly interpreted the source of the familiarity, the implicit memory, to a famous person rather than the list they read. In another study, participants were presented with a series of true and false statements. After these, they were shown another series of statements, involving both new sentences and repetition of the sentences from the previous series, and were asked to rate them by credibility. Participants rated already seen sentences as more credible, even if they were warned about the sentence's credibility or they were told which sentences were false. Participants had no explicit memory of a sentence being true or false, but they still had implicit memory of the sentence, which created a feeling of familiarity and the illusion of truth. In summary, implicit memory is great for things like instantly remembering the way back home or not having to think about how to do everyday tasks, like biking. But it falls short on other aspects, like eyewitness or false beliefs.